So the first thing that we notice is that we're in the correct format. We have a polynomial over a polynomial, so we can go ahead and use our theorems for vertical and horizontal asymptotes. Now, interestingly here, you cannot factor this guy any further because x squared plus 1, it's a sum of two perfect squares, and that is prime. So there's nothing to factor. The whole denominator will be left over. And when we set that leftover denominator equal to 0 and solve, we get x squared is equal to -1. Take the square root of both sides, and we get plus or minus the square root of -1, which is I. Now that's kind of a problem for us because when we talk about a vertical asymptote, we're trying to find this little dotted line that we're going to approach but never actually touch. And when we assume, or when we work through this, we're assuming that x is real and y is real. There's no place that we currently have on our Cartesian coordinate system as we're thinking about it for an I. And so what's going to have to happen here is when we get this I, we are going to ignore the I. And we ignore the I because we are working with a function f of x. So anytime you're working with a function, you're going to ignore that I because we're thinking about real input and get the real output. Now, if we ignore the I, that means that this whole thing about how x is equal to plus or minus I is a vertical asymptote is going to be ignored. And so that means that there is no vertical asymptote. Okay, so our conclusion there would be no vertical asymptote. For the horizontal asymptote, we look at the highest powers. So in this case, we have a highest power of 2 in the numerator, 2 in the denominator. So that tells us that there is a tie. And when there's a tie, we use the leading coefficients. So the leading coefficient here is 1. The leading coefficient here is 1. So we'll have y is equal to 1. The first numerator's leading coefficient over the denominator's leading coefficient. So that tells us that our horizontal asymptote is going to be y is equal to 1. So the vertical asymptote, we don't have one, and then the horizontal asymptote is y is equal to 1.